Let me tell you something. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a room when a woman realizes she has just been replaced. Not separated, not divorced, replaced. And I don't mean slowly. I mean while she's still carrying his child. Now, if you've lived long enough, and I know many of you have, you understand this truth. Heartbreak at 20 feels different than heartbreak at 35. And heartbreak while pregnant? That one doesn't even have a name. This is the story of the day my husband married another woman while I was 7 months pregnant with his son. And the night, years later, he watched me on national television. But we'll get to that. First, let's go back. I remember the smell of lemon disinfectant in the kitchen the morning he told me. Isn't it funny what your mind holds on to? Not the big speech, not the exact words, just the scent of pine sol and the hum of the refrigerator. I was standing barefoot, one hand pressed against my lower back because that baby was sitting heavy. My ankles looked like biscuits in the oven, swollen and overworked. I had just turned 32. He didn't sit down. That should have been my first clue. Men who plan to stay usually sit down. He stayed standing, like he was waiting for a bus. "I met someone," he said. Now, when a man says that, it never means he met someone at Bible study. I laughed. Yes, I actually laughed, because sometimes your spirit knows something is broken before your mind catches up, and laughter is the brain buying time. "I'm serious," he said. And then he told me he was in love. And then he told me she understood him. And then, this is the part that still makes me shake my head. He told me she was peaceful. Peaceful. As if I had been running a nightclub inside our house. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how some people will hurt you and still expect you to clap for them? That invitation wasn't about courtesy. It was about control. It was his way of saying, "See, I've moved on. You should too." Moved on? Sir, I couldn't even move without holding my lower back. I waddled into the house, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Not because I wanted to read it, but because something in me needed proof, needed to see how far he was willing to go. Saturday, 4 p.m., garden ceremony, white roses. Reception immediately following. White roses. Isn't that something? The same flowers from our wedding? Now that one stung. But here's the part that surprised me. I didn't cry. Not that day. Grief is funny like that. Sometimes it waits. Instead, I folded the invitation back into its envelope, placed it in the junk drawer, and made myself a sandwich. Turkey and mustard. Because babies don't care about your heartbreak. They kick anyway. And that night, when my feet were swollen and my mind wouldn't rest, I lay there staring at the ceiling and asked God one simple question. How am I supposed to raise this child without breaking? No thunder came, no angel choir, just silence. But in that silence, something shifted. You see, at 32, I had already learned one thing. People can walk away from you, but they can't walk away from who you become afterward. Now, I wish I could tell you I turned into some overnight warrior woman. I didn't. I was scared. Terrified, actually. Scared of hospital bills, scared of raising a son alone, scared of becoming that woman people whisper about at church. And oh, church folks whisper, let's be honest. Did you hear what happened to her? Asking for prayers. But here's what they didn't know. The same week he got married, I went into labor. And the night my husband said I do to another woman, I was saying push. Yes, life has a sense of irony. While he was cutting cake, I was gripping hospital rails. And the moment I held my son, red, crying, beautiful, something inside me hardened. Not my heart, my resolve. Because in that hospital room, with no husband beside me, I made a decision. If I was going to be humiliated, I was going to be humiliated on my way up. And what happened in the years that followed? Well, let's just say he didn't expect the woman he left behind to become the woman he'd one day see on television. But before we get there, you need to understand what those first 5 years looked like, because that's where the real transformation began. Those first 5 years, they weren't glamorous, they weren't inspirational, they were survival. Now, I know sometimes when we tell stories years later, they sound polished, like we just prayed, trusted God, and everything lined up neatly. That is not what happened. What happened was diapers at 2 a.m. What happened was falling asleep sitting up because my son had colic and cried like he had a full-time job. What happened was me heating up leftovers and pretending they tasted like dignity. Let me pause and ask you something. Have you ever been so tired that you forgot what version of yourself you used to be? That was me. Before pregnancy, I had dreams. I had plans. I was working in local media, small production jobs behind the scenes, learning how cameras worked, how stories were shaped. I loved it. After he left, I couldn't afford to love anything. I took whatever shifts I could. Administrative work, night shifts answering phones, filing paperwork in offices where nobody bothered to learn my name. And every time someone said, "So, what happened with your husband?" I would smile and say, "Oh, we just went separate ways." Separate ways. That's what we call abandonment when we're trying to sound graceful. Meanwhile, he was posting anniversary photos, matching outfits, beach vacations. And yes, people sent them to me because some folks think forwarding pictures is community service. Now, here's the thing. I never spoke badly about him in front of my son. Not once. Even when child support came late, even when birthdays were missed, even when promises dissolved like sugar in hot tea. Because I decided early I would not let bitterness be the inheritance I passed down. But don't mistake that for weakness. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. And during those 5 years, while I was quiet publicly, privately, I was building. You see, one evening, after rocking my son to sleep, I turned on the television. A talk show was playing. A woman was being interviewed about overcoming betrayal and building her own business, and something inside me sat up straight. Not jealousy, recognition. I remember whispering out loud, "I could do that." Then I laughed at myself because there I was in an apartment with peeling paint, overdue bills stacked like coasters, thinking about television. But here's something I learned the hard way. Sometimes the dream doesn't die, it just waits for the fire. And I had fire now. Not loud fire, not revenge fire, but steady, disciplined fire. So I started taking online classes at night, media training, public speaking, production skills, slowly, one course at a time. While my son slept, I studied. While the world assumed I was broken, I sharpened. And the day my ex-husband least expected it, the phone rang. And the opportunity on the other end? Well, that call would change everything. But before I answer it, you need to know why he started calling again. Because yes, years later, he reached out. Now let me tell you something about time. Time doesn't just move forward, it circles back. And 5 years after he married her, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in a long while. His. I stared at it. You ever notice how your body remembers before your mind does? My stomach tightened. Not love, not longing, just memory. I let it ring. If a man could walk away from a pregnant woman, he could leave a voicemail. And he did. "Hey, just checking in. Wanted to talk about our son." That's how they come back. Not with apologies, with checking in. Now here's the interesting part. His voice didn't sound confident. It sounded uncertain. Life has a way of sanding down arrogance. I waited a full day before calling back, not to be petty, but because I had learned something valuable over those years. Access is a privilege, and not everyone deserves immediate access to you anymore. When I returned the call, he didn't waste time with small talk. He said he and his wife were going through some things. Isn't that how they phrase it? Some things? As if some things isn't usually a tornado. He asked about our son's school, his hobbies, his grades, questions he could have asked any time in the previous 5 years. But here's what he really wanted, and I could hear it underneath the words. He wanted reassurance. He wanted to know I hadn't surpassed the narrative he created, because when he left, I was supposed to struggle forever. That was the silent agreement, wasn't it? He marries the peaceful woman. I fade quietly into hardship. But life had other plans. You see, by that time, I had finished my certifications. I had started working in local broadcasting again, small segments at first, community stories, human interest pieces, nothing flashy. But I was good, very good, because pain will train you to listen differently, and listening is what makes great storytelling. He asked what I was doing for work. I told him. There was a pause, a long one. "Oh, that's nice," he said. Nice. That word again. Men use nice when they don't know whether to be impressed or intimidated. Now here's where things shifted. A few months after that call, one of the segments I produced went viral locally. It was about single mothers rebuilding after divorce. The station received hundreds of messages, then thousands. And one afternoon, my supervisor walked into my office and said, "Have you ever considered being on camera?" I laughed. Me? On camera? At 37? With stretch marks and stories? But then she said something I will never forget. "You don't look like a victim. You look like a survivor." And that sentence did something to me. Because for years I had only seen myself through the lens of abandonment. But suddenly, someone saw authority. And when the invitation came for a regional talk show interview, the very first person I thought about wasn't him. It was my son. But what I didn't know was that across town, he would be watching too. The night of the interview, I stood in front of my closet longer than I care to admit. Now listen, when you've spent years surviving, you don't exactly have a television wardrobe section hanging neatly to the left. I had church dresses, work blouses, 2 good blazers, and 1 pair of heels that still believed in me. I chose a navy dress, simple, strong, the kind of color that doesn't beg for attention, but commands it anyway. And as I zipped it up, I caught my reflection. There she was. Not the abandoned wife, not the pregnant woman at the mailbox, but a woman who had built something steady out of rubble. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at yourself and realized the storm didn't destroy you? It introduced you? That was that moment. My son, now tall, all arms and opinions, looked up at me and said, "Mom, you nervous?" I smiled. "A little." He shrugged. "You'll be fine. You're good at talking." And I laughed. If only he knew how many nights I practiced into a hairbrush while he slept. The studio lights were brighter than I expected. The makeup chair felt surreal. When the hosts greeted me, she squeezed my hand and said, "Your story is powerful." And that word again, story. You see, when you're inside your pain, it feels ordinary. Bills, betrayal, lonely holidays. But when you step back, it becomes narrative. And narratives move people. The interview started gently. They asked about my career, about rebuilding, about single motherhood. And I answered honestly. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just honestly. I talked about being 7 months pregnant when my marriage ended. The audience gasped softly. I talked about giving birth alone. Silence filled the studio. And then the host asked the question that shifted everything. Did you ever want revenge? Now that right there, that's a trap question, because at some point, if we're truthful, we've all imagined the "I'll show you" moment. But I leaned forward and said something I hadn't rehearsed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace, and peace required growth. The room went still. And somewhere across town, he was watching. Because later, much later, I would learn exactly where he was sitting when he heard those words. But we're not there yet. The interview continued. I spoke about silence, not as weakness, but as discipline. I spoke about choosing not to poison my son's heart with resentment. And then, just before the segment ended, the host asked, "If he's watching tonight, what would you say? Now tell me, what would you have said?" I paused, not for effect, but because I genuinely had to search my heart. And when I finally answered, I had no idea that my words would travel straight into a living room where regret was already taking root. When she asked me, "If he's watching tonight, what would you say?" I didn't rush. See, when you're younger, you answer from emotion. When you're older, you answer from wisdom, and wisdom takes its time. I folded my hands in my lap, looked straight into the camera, and said, "I would say thank you." The host blinked. The audience shifted, because that wasn't the answer they expected. Let's be honest, they were waiting for fireworks, for poetic justice, for a sharp line that would clip nicely on social media. But I wasn't there for revenge television. I was there for truth. "Thank you," I repeated, because sometimes rejection is redirection, and if he hadn't left, I might have never discovered who I really was. Now let me pause right here and ask you something. Have you ever had to thank someone in your spirit for the very thing that broke you? It's not easy. It's grown woman work. And in that moment, I wasn't speaking to him. I was speaking to every woman watching who thought her story ended at abandonment. "It hurt," I continued, "but pain can either paralyze you or position you. I chose to let it position me." The studio was quiet, and then applause started. Soft at first, then stronger. Not for drama, for dignity. The segment wrapped, the host hugged me, the producers thanked me. My phone began buzzing before I even made it back to the dressing room. Messages, texts, missed calls, and one number standing out among them. His. Now listen, I didn't answer. Not right away. Because something powerful happens when you realize you no longer crave the reaction of someone who once defined you. I drove home in silence that night. No music, just reflection. When I walked through the door, my son was waiting up. "I saw it," he said, smiling. "You were amazing." Amazing. That word settled deep, because for years I had felt invisible, and now, seen. But across town, in a house that used to represent my replacement, the atmosphere wasn't celebratory. Later, and I mean months later, I would learn the details. He hadn't planned to watch. He had been flipping channels, and then there I was. Composed, confident, grateful, not broken. And something about that unsettled him. Because men can handle your anger, they can even handle your tears, but your evolution? That's harder to swallow. You see, regret doesn't knock loudly. It seeps in. Quiet. Persistent. And that night, as he sat on that couch beside the woman he chose, regret found its seat. But what happened in that living room after the applause faded? Well, that's where the story takes a turn he never saw coming. Now, I didn't find out what happened in that living room until much later. See, life has a way of delivering information when you no longer need it. But that night, according to him, the room went very quiet. He had been halfway through flipping channels when he froze. There I was, under bright studio lights, calm, poised, not the exhausted woman he left in a kitchen that smelled like lemon disinfectant, not the pregnant wife gripping her lower back. This woman looked steady. He said his wife, the peaceful one, asked, "Isn't that your ex?" He nodded, and as the interview continued, she stopped scrolling on her phone. Because here's the thing. Confidence is loud, even when spoken softly. When I said, rejection is redirection, he shifted in his seat. When I said pain can physician you, he cleared his throat. But when I said, thank you, he leaned forward. Because gratitude removes the villain from the story, and if he wasn't the villain anymore, then what was he? Just a chapter. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized someone expected you to remain small so that they could stay comfortable? That's what shifted that night. He later admitted something to me. He said, "I thought you'd always be struggling." There it was, the quiet assumption that I would forever be the cautionary tale. But instead, I became the headline. And something about that unsettled his household, because comparison is a thief. His wife began asking questions. Why didn't you tell me she worked in media? Why didn't you say she was doing well? He had, but not like this. Not nationally televised well, not applauded well, not respected well. You see, when he married her, he believed he was upgrading. Isn't that the language some people use? Upgrade, as if human beings are software versions. But growth isn't about upgrades, it's about endurance. And endurance doesn't look glamorous in year one. It looks tired, it looks uncertain, it looks like late-night classes and second jobs. But by year 10, it looks like authority. Now, here's the twist. 2 days after the interview aired, I received a formal invitation. Not a wedding one this time. A speaking engagement. A national women's conference wanted me to share my story. And guess who found out before I even responded? That's right, because small towns and small social circles talk. And when he heard about the conference, he called again. But this time, it wasn't to check in. It was to talk. Really talk. And what he said during that conversation? Well, that's something I didn't see coming, and neither did his wife. When his name lit up on my phone this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not triggering, just informational. Like a news alert you weren't expecting but already suspected was coming. I answered. His voice wasn't uncertain now. It was stripped. "You did good," he said. Not you were good. You did good. That small shift told me everything. He wasn't complimenting my performance. He was acknowledging my journey. "Thank you," I replied calmly. There was a pause. And then he said something I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. "I owe you an apology." Now listen, apologies hit differently when you no longer need them. 10 years earlier, those words would have felt like water in a desert. Now, they felt like rain on a house I'd already rebuilt. I was selfish, he continued. I thought I deserved something easier. Easier. There's that word again. Peaceful. Nice. Easier. Funny how men sometimes confuse easy with unexamined. He admitted he panicked when I got pregnant, said he felt unprepared, said when the other woman came along, lighter, carefree, no responsibility, he ran toward that feeling. Not love, relief. Now let me ask you something. How many times have we seen people run from responsibility and call it destiny? Mm-hmm. He went quiet for a moment, then added, watching you, I realized I misjudged you. I almost smiled, not out of pride, but because growth changes your posture, and when your posture changes, people reevaluate the memory of you. I never hated you, I said softly. I just stopped depending on you. And that sentence landed between us, because dependency is powerful. When someone no longer depends on you emotionally, financially, spiritually, you lose control. And he felt that loss. Then came the part I didn't expect. He said, my marriage isn't what I thought it would be. There it was. Not dramatic, not explosive, just honest. He didn't blame her. He didn't blame me. He blamed himself. He said the grass wasn't greener. It was just different grass. And different grass still needs watering. I didn't rescue him. I didn't counsel him. I didn't offer nostalgia. I listened. Because listening is what strong people do when they're no longer trying to win. Before hanging up, he said something that surprised me. I'm proud of you. Now tell me, isn't it something when the man who once underestimated you has to speak your value out loud? But here's the real twist. That conversation wasn't closure. It was confirmation. Confirmation that my silence had not been weakness. It had been construction. And just when I thought the story had reached its quiet resolution, the conference invitation came with one condition: a live Q&A session, unfiltered, and someone in that audience would ask a question that would bring everything full circle. The conference hall was bigger than the television studio. Brighter lights, longer stage, hundreds of women, some young, some silver-haired, some sitting with notebooks already open like they came ready to harvest something. And I remember standing backstage thinking, Lord, how did a woman who once cried in a kitchen make it here? Now, if you've ever spoken in front of a crowd, you know this. It's not the speech that makes your hands shake. It's the responsibility. Because somebody out there is holding onto your words like a rope, and you don't want to let go. I walked onto that stage to applause that felt warm, not loud. The kind of applause that says, we see you. I told the story, not dramatically, not theatrically, just truthfully. The pregnancy, the wedding invitation, the hospital room, the rebuilding, the television interview. And I noticed something as I spoke. Women nodding, some wiping tears, some smiling knowingly. Pain may be personal, but it's never unique. When I finished, the moderator stepped forward and said, we'll now open the floor for questions. And here it was, the unpredictable part. A young woman stood first. She asked about co-parenting. Another asked about forgiveness. Then, about 15 minutes in, an older woman, maybe late 60s, stood slowly. She didn't rush, didn't tremble. She held the microphone like she had something deliberate to say. My question, she began, is simple. If he asked to come back, would you let him? Now let me ask you something. What would you have answered? The room went still, because that question wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who's ever been replaced, every woman who rebuilt, every woman who healed. Would you reopen a door that nearly crushed you? I didn't answer right away, not for suspense, for honesty. Then I said, no. Not angry, not bitter, just clear. And the room exhaled. Why? She asked gently. And that's when I said something I had only fully understood in recent years. Because the version of me he left no longer exists, and the version of me I've become deserves someone who didn't have to lose me to value me. There was a murmur, then applause. Not loud, strong. But here's the part no one in that audience knew. He was watching again. Yes, because someone had sent him the live stream link. And when I said no, it didn't wound him. It humbled him. But the real full circle moment, it didn't happen on stage. It happened the next morning. And it came from the one person whose opinion mattered most. My son. The morning after the conference, I was sitting at the hotel window with a cup of coffee that cost entirely too much. You ever notice how hotel coffee tastes like ambition and regret at the same time? I was replaying the Q&A in my mind. That question, would you let him come back? And my answer, clear, final, peaceful. There was a knock at the door. Room service? I hadn't ordered anything. When I opened it, there stood my son, taller than me now, shoulders broad, eyes steady. Surprise, he said, grinning. I drove up. Now listen, nothing prepares you for the moment your child becomes a man right in front of you. We hugged, and I held on just a little longer than usual. He pulled back and said, I watched the whole thing. I smiled. Oh yeah? He nodded. Yeah, especially the part about Dad. There it was. We sat down. And for a second, I felt that old instinct, the carefulness, the desire to protect him from adult truths. But he wasn't a little boy anymore. Mom, he said gently, I'm glad you said no. I blinked. Not because I doubted my answer, but because I hadn't realized how much he needed to hear it. I needed to see, he continued, that love doesn't mean accepting less. Now tell me, what greater reward is there than your child learning strength from your scars? He wasn't angry at his father, not bitter, just observant. I respect him, he said, but I admire you. In those words, they healed places applause never could. You see, the real victory was never television, never conferences, never public recognition. It was this: raising a son who understood dignity, raising a son who saw his mother rebuild without tearing someone else down. Later that afternoon, as I packed my bag, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Short, simple. I understand. Thank you for being honest. No pleading, no pressure, just acceptance. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Closure doesn't always come with dramatic speeches or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, with mutual understanding, with maturity, with distance. He married her while I was pregnant. Years later, he watched me on TV. But the real story wasn't about what he saw. It was about what I became. And if there's one thing I want you to carry with you, especially those of you who have lived long enough to know heartbreak's many faces, it's this: being replaced does not mean being erased. Sometimes it's just the beginning of being revealed. And the woman you become after survival, she doesn't beg to be chosen. She chooses herself. And that is a story worth telling. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. If this story touched your heart, Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about resilience, dignity, and quiet justice. Because some lessons don't come with applause, they come with peace.